case, this power of judgment in regards to that which, according to laws of sensuality, is liked universally. It has a rule, but not through discursive cognitions, but through intuitum. Immanuel Kant. In my previous lecture, I explained how to Kant all pleasure is ultimately a feeling of our own vitality being strengthened, being increased. And since, which I also explained, since we have a threefold life, that is, we have an animal life, we have an intellectual or spiritual life, and we have something in between, a life as thinking animals. Since we have this threefold life, we also, according to Kant, have three kinds of pleasure. We have the base animal sense pleasure, the pleasure that Kant describes as a delight in the pleasant. We have the intellectual pleasure that comes from thinking, which Kant describes as an approval of the good, whether it's the immediate good, the useful, or whether it's the immediate good, the moral good. But between those two, there is aesthetical pleasure, a pleasure that comes simply from viewing, simply from reflection about the form that something has in our viewing. And that is the aesthetical pleasure in the beautiful, which the critique of the power of judgment mainly deals with. And that is exactly what I want to talk about now. Now, this beautiful to Kant is based on a judgment. It is the power of judgment through which we can experience beauty. And all judgments can be explained according to the table of categories or the table of judgments. And I already made lectures on both. Because what Kant is saying is that all of our thinking happens within 12 basic categories, 12 basic concepts that determine all our thoughts. And these 12 categories, they are based on the 12 functions of judgment. So on the 12 ways, the 12 forms in which we can judge about things. And since this is the basic structure of our thinking, all our thoughts and all our judgments can be described by that structure. And that is true also for the judgment that something is beautiful. Which means that for Kant, this judgment has 4 moments, as he says. And these moments follow the structure of the table of categories or of judgments. So we can talk about the beautiful according to its quantity, its quality, its relation, or its modality. And here I want to start with the quantity. And I want to start by asking the question, what kind of judgment is it when I judge that something, let's say a flower that I see, that something is beautiful? And Kant, of course, says that all our judgments are either synthetic judgments or they are analytic judgments. That is also something I already explained in a previous lecture on the question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible? Well, it should be clear that the judgment that something is beautiful cannot be an analytic judgment, because to analyze means not learning anything new, but only bringing more clarity into what we already know. Kant translates analytic judgments as explaining judgments, and that's what they do. They explain something to us. So I can analyze the concept of a body and say a body has extension in space, a body is three-dimensional. Or I can analyze the concept of a father and say a father must be male. Or I can analyze the concept of a circle and can say the circle cannot have angles. But I cannot analyze the concept of a flower or a sunset or a woman and analytically find that beauty is part of that very concept. I mean, if that were the case, then all flowers, all sunsets, all women, and so on would have to be beautiful, just like all fathers have to be male, or all circles have to be round and without angles. So clearly, it is a synthetic judgment. So a judgment where I synthesize two concepts. I synthesize the concept of this object, let's say the flower or the sunset, with the concept of beauty. And like all synthetic judgments, this is an expanding judgment, as Kant translated it. So it is a judgment that expands my knowledge. It is a judgment that teaches me something new. But if the judgment about beauty is synthetic, then the next question must be, is it a synthetic judgment a priori or a posteriori? And here Kant says both, because it depends in what way you are looking at that judgment. Because to Kant, judgments, and that I also talked about previously in the lecture on how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, judgments are always either logical judgments that are about cognition, about knowledge, about truth or falsehood, or they are aesthetical judgments that are about pleasure or displeasure. Or they could also be certainly practical judgments that are about what I should or shouldn't do, but those don't concern us here for the moment. For the moment, we will just deal with logical and aesthetical judgments. And the thing is that a logical judgment just connects a subject about which I'm making a judgment with its predicate. Like when I say dogs are mammals, I have the subject of dog, and I say that being a mammal is one of the predicates of the concept of dog. So it's one of the attributes of dogs to be mammals. And such logical judgments, they can be neutral in terms of pleasure or displeasure. Like, for example, this very example that dogs are mammals. I don't feel particular pleasure or displeasure at dogs being mammals and not reptiles. I don't really care one way or another. But then when it comes to aesthetical judgments, so judgments about pleasure, I can look at them both ways. Every aesthetical judgment could also be treated as a logical judgment. So when I say this pizza tastes good, for example, then on the one hand, it is of course aesthetical. It is about pleasure. I'm saying that this pizza is pleasurable to me. I'm talking about the way it relates to me, about the way it makes me feel. But at the same time, I'm still giving a predicate to a subject. I'm saying that this subject pizza has the predicate of tasting good, just like the subject dog has the predicate of being a mammal. And in that way, I could look at the aesthetical judgment as a logical judgment too. And now, when it comes to the quantity of judgments, I explained in the lecture on the table of judgments how all our judgments, according to their quantity, are either singular judgments about just one thing, or they are particular judgments about many things, or they are universal judgments about all the things. And well, the thing is with aesthetical judgments that as aesthetical judgments, they can have the same but also a different quantity as they have as logical judgments. So when I say this pizza here in front of me tastes good, then as a logical judgment, this is singular, right? I'm not saying that all pizzas taste good. I'm just talking about this one singular pizza. And also, as an aesthetical judgment, it is singular as well. Because what I mean when I say it tastes good is it tastes good to me. So it causes pleasure to me, this particular individual. But I could also say that all pizzas taste good. Like, maybe no one is gonna say that every single pizza on earth tastes good. Doesn't matter how well it's made, if it's made by a very good Italian chef or just some fast food pizza. It doesn't matter what's on top of it. So if it's a classical pizza margherita or if it's pineapple pizza or whatever, every single pizza on earth tastes good. Maybe no one is gonna make that judgment, but you could make that judgment, and this judgment would, as a logical judgment, be universal. Because now I'm not saying that just one singular pizza is tasting good, but I'm saying that this predicate of tasting good belongs to all pizzas that there are. But at the same time, as an aesthetical judgment, it is still singular, because what I want to express in terms of pleasure and displeasure is still that they taste good to me. I'm not saying all pizzas taste good to all human beings, but they all taste good to me. So I am saying logically that all pizzas share a certain predicate, but aesthetically I'm saying that they only shared in regards to me as a singular person. But now I could also say all pizzas taste good to everyone. Now, that would be an incorrect judgment, to be sure, but that's not what matters here, whether a judgment is correct or not. It's just about the example. I could say that all pizzas taste good to everyone, and now I would make a judgment which is universal as a logical judgment, because I'm saying all pizzas have this predicate. But that is also universal as an aesthetical judgment, because I'm saying that they taste good not just for me as an individual, but for everyone. And lastly, I could say this pizza, so this one singular pizza, tastes good for everyone. Like, it's so well made that everyone has to love this one particular pizza. Now my judgment is singular as a logical judgment. I'm not saying that all pizzas must taste good to everyone, but just this one. But as an aesthetical judgment, it is universal. I am saying that, well, this one pizza, everyone must love it. So you see how one and the same judgment can have a different quantity depending on whether we look at it as a logical judgment and just ask to how many subjects is this predicate ascribed to, or whether we look at it as an aesthetical judgment and ask how many people are said to have this feeling of pleasure or displeasure. Now, the example I gave with the pizza, that is an aesthetical judgment, but it is about sense pleasure, right? It is about the delight we take in something pleasant, in something that tastes good. Now, when it comes to the beautiful, though, what is the quantity of the judgments of beauty? Well, it is quite obvious that taken as logical judgments, they are empirical. And therefore they are judgments a posteriori. I can't know beforehand, before experiencing something, that it will be beautiful, right? Like, I can't know before I go into a garden that it will be beautiful. I can't know before meeting a woman I've never seen that she will be beautiful. I can't know before going into a room I've never been to that there will be beautiful things inside. So I can only know that a certain thing has this predicate of beauty, of being beautiful. I can only know that a posteriori. And in that sense, the judgment that something is beautiful is a singular judgment, because that's the thing with all judgments a posteriori. And I already talked about this more extensively in my lecture on what is science to Kant. The thing is that all judgments a posteriori, they can never have true universality, Kant says. Maybe I can use induction to conclude from some cases that many cases or all the cases will be like the some cases I know, but that only gives me generality, never universality. So sure, I can say I've seen 1,000 white swans, so swan are white, but that can never make me sure that I won't ever find a black one. And the same could probably be said about beauty, right? So I could say, oh, flowers are generally beautiful. I've seen 1,000 beautiful flowers, but I could never be sure that all flowers really must be beautiful and that I will never see an ugly flower. So really, taken as a logical judgment, my judgment about beauty is a synthetic judgment a posteriori, and is therefore a singular judgment. And Kant says that this is probably one reason why we have called the sense for the beautiful, or the faculty that is judging beauty, why we have called it taste. And that is something that many languages do, like the English language does it. But for example, in German, it's the same. The word for taste is also applied to judging beauty. And Kant differentiates the two types of taste. He talks of the taste of sense. That is the taste in the actual sense of the word. So the taste for, well, when you eat food and how that tastes. And then when it comes to the taste for beauty, the taste for art, and so on, Kant calls that the taste of reflection. But he says that this is maybe one reason why they have gotten the same word in the language, because when it comes to the taste of sense, so to tasting food, it is also a synthetic judgment a posteriori we are making, and it is also therefore a singular judgment, right? So just like I can't know before seeing a flower or before seeing a painting that it will be beautiful, I can only know when I experience it. And even then, I only know that this flower or that this painting is beautiful. I cannot be assured that all flowers or all paintings are beautiful. Just like that, before tasting a certain food, I cannot know that it tastes good or bad. I have to experience it first. And even when I did experience it, I can now not know that all the food must taste good, but I can only know that this one tastes good. Well, but when it comes to taking the judgment that something is beautiful as an aesthetical judgment, then the quantity is different. And here, the judgment is not singular, Kant says, but rather it is universal. Because what it means to call something beautiful, not just pleasant for myself, like food that tastes good or sex that feels good or whatever, but rather beautiful, what it means, according to Kant, is that I'm saying everyone will take a liking to it. Everyone will find pleasure in it. Right? When I say, oh, this is a beautiful flower, then I expect that if I call over my friend and show that flower to him, he will also like it. And that is what is special about beauty. Because when it comes to sense pleasure, Kant says that is not the case. Here we don't necessarily expect that everyone has the same taste. I can accept and probably expect that food that tastes good to me, another person maybe won't like it. Or someone that is attractive to me, like I might find a woman attractive, another person maybe won't find her attractive. Maybe that other guy is gay and doesn't find women at all attractive because he's into men. But when it comes to the beautiful, we are saying by describing something as beautiful that it won't just be liked by us, but rather that it will be liked by others too. But this universal judgment, so let's say, for example, I say this flower is beautiful, then as a logical judgment, again, it is singular. I'm not saying all flowers are beautiful, but just this one. But as an aesthetical judgment, it is universal. I'm not saying this flower just brings me pleasure. Maybe if I said this flower smells good, then I would say it brings pleasure to me. Maybe the next person won't like the smell. Maybe the next person will say, oh, it's so sweet that it's too much or whatever. But when I say the flower is beautiful, then I'm saying it doesn't just bring pleasure to me to look at this flower, but rather every human being who looks at this flower will, or at least should, if they have any taste for beauty at all, should feel pleasure at looking at that flower. Well, how could I possibly know that without having first checked and questioned every single human being? Obviously, this is not a judgment a posteriori. This is not me judging from experience. Rather, it is a judgment I make before experience, before even having asked others if they too like this flower or if they too like this sunset. By calling it beautiful, I already make the assumption that they will or that they should too find it beautiful. And like all universal judgments, again, I talked about this in my lecture on what is science to Kant, like all universal judgments, this one is a judgment a priori. Because, again, a posteriori there can be generality, but never true universality. And this should show that it is a synthetic judgment a priori to call something beautiful. To give it that predicate, one more time, that is a synthetic judgment a posteriori, and therefore a singular judgment. But to say that everyone has to give that predicate to this thing, that everyone has to find it beautiful, that is a synthetic judgment a priori and a universal judgment. And this, Kant says, might actually be another reason why the faculty that is judging beauty was called taste, after the taste of sense. Because in the taste of sense, there cannot be universality, but there can be a certain generality at least. Like when I say this food tastes good, in the strictest sense, I can only say it tastes good to me. Maybe someone else won't like it. But there are, of course, some general statements we can make here. There are some foods, some dishes that will taste good, maybe not to everyone, but to many or to most people. Like, for example, many people do like sweet stuff, and so many people will like a cake or whatever. And a good host, when inviting guests, would need to be able to judge their taste of sense and to give them food that is not just according to his private taste, that won't just be to his liking, but rather to give them food that they will enjoy too, right? And this has at least a certain analogy to the person who wants to create something beautiful or to make something beautiful. Because Kant says, when I want to make something beautiful, let's say I'm a painter who wants to create a beautiful painting, or I'm a musician who wants to compose beautiful music, or maybe I want to make my own home beautiful. I want to bring beauty into my room. Or maybe I want to dress in a beautiful way before I go out. Then what that means is I want to create something that won't just be liked by me, by my private taste, but rather something that will be liked by everyone. That is what it means to call something tasteful. Like if I say that, oh, he decorated his room in a very tasteful manner, or she is wearing a very tasteful dress, then I mean precisely that. I mean, they created something that is not just liked by themselves, but rather they created something that I and others who see it can enjoy too. So that is what taste, and here I now mean not the taste of sense, the taste for food, but the taste of reflection, so the taste for the beautiful, that is what taste means. It is a faculty, Kant says, of choosing something which will be enjoyed not just by me but by everyone. It is a faculty that allows him who has it, him who has taste, to pick something that will find general or even universal applause, Kant says. And this taste is based on the aesthetic power of judgment. Or rather, it is the aesthetic power of judgment, at least in one of its forms and one of its incarnations. I talked about the power of judgment in its own lecture, and there I said that this power of judgment, according to Kant, can work in two ways. It can be the determining power of judgment, which is not independent, which is not free, so to say, but which is ruled over by the intellect. The intellect being the faculty of concepts or of rules, and the determining power of judgment just, well, determines under which rules something falls. It just determines which concept of the intellect to apply to something. So I have an animal in front of me, and I have a concept of dog, I have a concept of cat, I have a concept of fish or of bird, and now I make the determining judgment that this is a dog and not one of those other animals. But our power of judgment can also be the reflecting power of judgment. And in that case, it is not under the intellect and not just applying the intellect's rules, but rather it is reflecting on an object to which there is no rule yet, and it is seeking a rule that this object might fall under. And this reflecting power of judgment again can once again work in two ways. It can be teleological, which doesn't concern us here, or it can be aesthetical. And the aesthetical reflecting power of judgment, that is what the taste of reflection is to Kant. We are not given a rule, like we can't say that there's a certain rule of what is beautiful, what attributes does something need to be beautiful, and we can't say that we are just applying this rule, but rather we are given an object to which there is no rule, and now we are just freely reflecting about it, and we may find with our aesthetical power of judgment that this is an object which is formed in a way that brings pleasure not just to me as an individual, but that could bring pleasure to everyone. And that is having taste, being able to make that judgment. Well, since the taste is a certain form of the power of judgment, everything I said about the power of judgment, in the lecture I talked about that faculty, everything I said there in general applies also to the taste specifically. I said in that lecture that according to Kant, the power of judgment only develops a bit further in life. First, we develop our intellect, and only later do we develop our judgment. And therefore, he also says that taste comes later in life. He says that youth wants sensations, strong sensations. So, right, young people might be after adventure, they might be after sex, they might seek excitement of the senses. And with age, Kant says the interest in sensations may lower a bit. The sensations eventually with age might even get more dull. But taste can develop with age, because with age people might want to reflect more, while with youth they want to sense more. And sensations can only bring us the pleasure of the first kind, so the delight and the pleasant, the sense pleasure. But the pleasure of the second kind, the liking of the beautiful, that is something that requires reflection, that requires the power of judgment, the aesthetic power of judgment, the taste of reflection, to, well, reflect and make a judgment. And also, I said in the lecture on the power of judgment that not only does it develop later in life, I also said it cannot be talked, because that, according to Kant, would mean giving a rule to it. And how good could we give a general rule for how to use the faculty of applying or finding rules? Because then we would need to apply that faculty to that general rule too. That doesn't work. That would be contradictory. So the power of judgment cannot really be talked. We cannot be given a general rule on how to judge. Rather, it can only be trained, Kant says. And how can it be trained? Well, by making judgments, by again and again trying, and surely sometimes failing, but slowly growing better at making judgments. And that would then also apply to taste. Taste, so the taste of reflection, the taste for the beautiful, that is not something I'm just born with. Little children, they don't have taste at first. They might not yet appreciate fine art. But they can train their taste. They can make judgments of taste. So they can try to judge whether something is beautiful. And again, that means judging whether something will be enjoyed not just by themselves, but by everyone. Whether something will bring enjoyment to others too. And by making these judgments, they can train their taste. And the best way, I also talked about this in the lecture on the power of judgment, the best way to train it, according to Kant, is through examples. The power of judgment needs examples of judgments, of correct judgments. And so that means that in order to develop our taste, we need tasteful examples. We need to be surrounded by beautiful things and by beautiful art, and to learn to recognize this beauty in order to develop our taste and in order to become more capable of picking something tasteful, picking something which will be beautiful to everyone. And to Kant, this is what constitutes the value of the classics and of dealing with the classics and of studying ancient and dead language. The value lies in the development of taste. Because the classic works of art, they can serve as examples, as models, as samples of good taste that allow the developing aesthetical power of judgment, so the developing taste of reflection, to, well, develop, to train itself. Because if you think about it, that is actually what classic means, what it means to call something classical. Because Kant says the classics have been tested against time. Like something that is relatively new and that is enjoyed by people right now, that might just be something that is enjoyed because of its newness or because of a certain fashion or because it fits the general ideology of our time. But the classical works of art, they have been liked and enjoyed for decades or even centuries or sometimes even millennia. And that means that very different people in very different times all found them beautiful. And that means that they indeed, Kant says, must be works of good taste, must be works that can be enjoyed by everyone and not just by some particular people. And if you think about it, that is indeed what it means when we call something a classic. And to be sure, Kant is mainly thinking about the ancient Greeks and Romans and their classical works, like Homer's Iliad or the tragedies of Sophocles or the works of Virgil. But I think, at least to a lesser extent, And that is always what we mean when we call something a classic, right? A classic, like when I say this is a classic movie, or when I say this is a classic piece of a certain genre, like this is a classic piece of rock music or whatever. Um, what we mean is that this is exemplary. This is not just some movie or some piece of rock music, but rather this is something that even many years or many decades later, um, even when certain trends are now over, uh, still people can agree that this was a good piece of art. So it is something that is indeed tasteful, that has been tested against time, and that is still being enjoyed when the times have changed. That is what we mean when we call something a classic, and that is exactly why, to Kant, the classics can serve as good examples to develop your taste. But to be sure, he is mainly thinking of the ancient classics. For one, they of course have had the longest time to be tested, and they are still valued. And that is one reason why they are exemplary. Now, to be clear here, Kant is saying that this is only true when it comes to aesthetics, when it comes to, well, the beautiful. So, this is not true, he stresses, when it comes to science, when it comes to philosophy. In philosophy, it is very important to Kant to stress that there is no classical literature in philosophy. Um, I must not say that, I don't know, let's say Plato, or even a newer author like Kant mentions Leibniz in his time. I must not say that they are the classics. They were the great philosophers, and they have to be taken as an example of what is good philosophy, and everyone needs to just copy them. No, Kant says even the greatest philosopher must be freely criticized, and there must always be the possibility for progress. If he was wrong in some instance, um, then we should be able to say he was wrong, and to make a new attempt that hopefully will be better. And Kant is very much against those who try to find a higher, a deeper wisdom in the ancients. So that was something that some people did in his time, that maybe at the end of the 18th century became more popular amongst certain circles, and that is something that is still popular amongst certain people. They want to go back as far as possible. There are people. I was taught by one such guy. I had one such teacher at university who basically believed that everything after Plato was shit. Or at least, if not complete shit, it was at least worse than Plato. Plato was the highest philosophy we ever had. And people like to go back to this ancient stuff and to find some ancient wisdom that the superficial thinkers of later centuries are lacking. And those people, they love Plato, but also at times they will love to go back even further. They will talk about Pythagoras and his wisdom, or maybe they will go further back beyond the ancient Greeks. They will talk about the wisdom of Zarathustra, or the wisdom of the ancient Egyptians. The further back, the better. And the less we actually know about these people and what they actually believed and talked, the better. If we have no actual writings of them, great, because that means we can make up all sorts of things. We can speculate uh, about what they actually talked, and that is exactly what is happening here. Kant would say, such people, they don't want clarity; they love darkness. Mm, they will look at ancient teachings of philosophy, of very early philosophy, or of mythology, and they will talk about the images, the metaphors used here, and how deep they are. But really, Kant says, um, those ancient thinkers used images and metaphors because they had not reached scientific clarity yet. Kant is not saying that they were completely worthless. They might have found, or at least unconsciously sensed, some truth already, but they had not yet the proper words to express that truth. They could only express it in images, in stories, in metaphors and allegories, in myths. And since then, our science, our philosophy, our way to talk about truth has progressed, and we have achieved more clarity, and we should try to further that progress to achieve ever more clarity, Kant would say. So we should not just go back to the beginnings and pretend that everything was so much deeper and they knew so much more than we do know. So no, in science you should not take the ancients as an example, because in science we have since moved on. But when it comes to the beautiful, when it comes to art, then the ancients can serve as an example. Not not as something that should just mindlessly be copied. That's not what Kant means. But as an example of what constitutes good, tasteful art, so that we can develop our own taste. Because for one, as I already said, they have been tested against time and have been enjoyed by different centuries. But also the other thing, and that is where the specific value of learning ancient language comes in. The other thing is that Kant says only that language can give a lasting example of good taste. And why is that? Well, because a living language always changes and develops. So something that was tasteful in that language um, may not be tasteful anymore some decades or some centuries later. Like the further you go back, the harder it will be to still find this work of art. And here, of course, we are mostly talking about art that is expressed in words, so about poetry and so on. The harder it will be to still find it tasteful, because language evolves, and something that might have sounded good in one time, um, maybe nowadays it sounds kind of cliched because it has been copied so much, while in that time it was still original. Or maybe nowadays it sounds kind of full of pathos and pompous, because some expressions and some words are kind of old fashioned nowadays. Or maybe it even sounds ridiculous because words changed their sense. Like, take for example, if you are reading a work of English literature from, let's say, the 19th or the 18th century, with school children nowadays, it might be that at some point there will be some sentence about two men having a very gay time with each other. And in that time when that work was written, it was a completely innocent sentence. But nowadays, you will not be able as a teacher to read that passage with your class without making all these teenagers snicker and giggle, because the language has changed. And gay now doesn't mean just happy and joyful anymore, it means homosexual. And that is why Kant says that only a dead language, like ancient Greek and ancient Latin, can give lasting examples of good taste. Because if someone asks me what is good Latin, how should I write? How should my style be if I want to write in good Latin? Then someone can point me at Cicero and tell me that is good Latin. That is the example of how Latin should be. But if someone asks me, what is good English? I cannot be given an example that will still be able to serve as an example in, let's say, a century. Like, at his time, Shakespeare might have had good English, but nowadays, of course, we can still very much enjoy and appreciate Shakespeare. Um, but still, we cannot just take him as a perfect example of good and tasteful English, because nowadays, if you actually try to talk like Shakespeare with all the thous and so on, um, it would just sound ridiculous and pretentious. And that's why Kant recommends reading the works of the ancients to develop your taste, and of course, reading them in the original, not in translation, because again, any translation into a living language um, will eventually be outdated, and you will eventually need a new translation because the language changed again. Only the original can be unchanging. And yeah, this is why it is important to Kant for the development of taste to learn the ancient languages, and why he says that whenever the classics were taken as examples, that was when taste developed best. So take, for example, the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, they turned back to the classic works of art of the ancients and took them as examples, and that's how they developed their own taste. And the same, to maybe a lesser degree, happened in Kant's time, happened at the end of the 18th century. There was a renewed interest and renewed appreciation for the ancient art that had in Germany largely been started by Winkelmann and his study of the ancient artworks. And poets of the time, like Goethe and Schiller, um, they took the ancients as their examples. On the other hand, Kant says, um, as soon as we abandon the ancients and as we abandon the study of their ancient dead language, as soon as that happens, there will be barbarism. Now, it is important to not misunderstand what Kant means by that. He's not saying that, oh, we will become more primitive by that, and we will start to just beat each other's heads in if we don't read Homer or Virgil anymore. No, the word barbarism has since changed its meaning. Now we are taking it to be sort of a synonym for savagery or for brutality. Um, but that's not what it actually meant at the time of Kant. Because to the ancient Greeks, and we get the word from them, to the ancient Greeks, everyone was a barbarian who was not a Greek and who was not Greek speaking. And in Kant's day, in the 18th century, people, including Kant, took the ancient Greeks to be the height, the examples of culture, of art. And that means that everyone who's a barbarian, who's a non Greek, has a less tasteful culture in the eyes of the 18th century. So, for example, the Persians were considered barbarians by the Greeks. Now, Kant would not say that the Persians were wild savages. He, of course, knew that they had a very developed empire already, and that technologically they were not necessarily behind the Greeks, but he would say that their art was behind the Greek art, that they didn't have the same beautiful statues and buildings and tragedies as the Greeks did. So that is what a barbarian is to Kant. Not necessarily someone primitive or someone savage, but someone without taste. So what Kant is saying is that if we ever stop learning the ancient language and taking the classical artworks as examples, we will turn into barbarians. We will become tasteless. And well, that's exactly what has happened since, right? Like, almost no one nowadays is studying the ancient language. Like, of course, some people learn them, and of course, there are philologists at university who study them. But it is not considered part of a general higher education anymore, as it was in Kant's day. Um, it is not just a given that more or less anyone who goes to university has been taught classical Latin at school. And also, the classical artworks, surely there are still people who appreciate the Iliad. But compared to the general public, those make up a small minority. And indeed, we can find that we are barbarians, that we live in a very tasteless time. And we are, of course, also in a time that doesn't care much for taste. And for the development of taste. And that is also maybe why we don't care much about the works of the ancients or about these dead languages. Like here in Germany, there are still some schools that teach Latin as a second or at least as a third language. And there's always these debates about that doesn't fit our time anymore. We should finally ditch these Latin classes. They are useless. Our kids don't need to learn Latin. They should rather learn something useful. They should learn a living language instead. That is very much according to the zeitgeist of our age, because, well, we live in an age of utilitarianism, in an age that has no actual appreciation for education, for culture as such, but rather in an age that only asks, is something useful? Like, will what I learn here at school, they are not asking, will what I learn or what my children learn at school, will that turn them into more of a human? Will that cultivate them? Which was the ideal in the 18th century, or the ideal of humanism in the age of the Renaissance. But rather, we now ask, will what the kid learns at school, will that benefit the kid on the job market? Will it in the end lead to that kid making more money as a grown up? That's basically all we are asking, right? And this utilitarianism, this hyperfixation on usefulness, on economic usefulness, and of course on the sense pleasure, that is exactly what makes us so tasteless, and what, well, makes our taste so barbaric. Because there maybe hasn't been another time which had so little appreciation for anything that was not of its own time. Like, if you look around, you will find that most people, when it comes to music, or when it comes to books, or when it comes to movies, or when it comes to video games, no matter which form of art, they cannot appreciate anything which is older than 10 years or 20 years maybe. It will be completely foreign to them if it's any older. They will find it too old fashioned. They won't find any way to connect with it because it's not what they are used to. Like maybe in an older video game, the graphics are not good enough for them, or maybe an older movie is too serious or not fast paced enough or whatever. And I've totally met people who could not appreciate older stuff, who would tell me that maybe classical music is boring. Well, it was probably not boring to the people who composed it and to listen to it at the time. So you finding it boring now seems to be just a result of you being stuck in your own time and being unable to connect to different times. And of course, there are some people who do appreciate older stuff. Like there are people who still, again, read the Iliad. Or, I mean, it doesn't have to get that old. There are people, of course, who still very much appreciate Shakespeare or whatever. But still, if you look at the general majority, I think it is quite remarkable how little they appreciate anything that came before them. And that is, I think, a quite new phenomenon. That is something we didn't have in other times. Like in the 18th century, in the days of Kant, or just now I've been reading the letters of the young Nietzsche in the middle of the 19th century. It is unthinkable how he and his friends at maybe 15, 16 years old, how much they appreciated the tragedies of the ancient Greeks. It is unthinkable today to find a 16-year-old who would read ancient Greek tragedies. And I'm sure, I mean, there are 8 billion people on Earth. I'm sure somewhere there is a 16-year-old. But he would then very much be an exception to the rule. It goes so far that really we cannot even appreciate things anymore that are just some years old. Like I totally get recommended articles or videos here on YouTube that talk about shows which were very, very big on TV just 15 or 20 years ago. So this is not about ancient Greek literature, right? This is something from this very century. And still, these articles, these videos, they will say, oh, it doesn't hold up to the test of time, or it is untimely now, it doesn't fit our time anymore. Maybe because it wasn't politically correct according to nowadays standards, or maybe because it doesn't fit your current sense of humor anymore, or whatever. And I always find it very remarkable how little self-reflection there is in such judgments. Like these people will say with a straight face, "Oh, now we know better. This show that was produced 20 years ago, it's untimely now. These jokes, they were totally not politically correct. You can't do that anymore." And they will not stop for a second and ask themselves, wait, if in just 20 years our judgments have changed so much and we are now deeming something unworthy which we enjoyed back then, what will happen in another 50 or 15 or 20 years? How will our children, how will we ourselves, when we have grown a bit older, look back at this time of ours? Like they take their current judgments as if they were absolute, as if now we had found the truth, when in fact they are most likely just another fashion that will pass and be replaced by something else. But all of this to Kant would be a form of what he would call aesthetical egoism. It is egocentrical that we cannot connect with something else. That is, once again, that is barbaric to Kant. That is what barbarian peoples, what they are like. They can only appreciate their own art, and if they get into any sort of connection with different people, with a different culture, with other forms of art, um, then they will just dismiss it. They will not be able to connect with it at all. True taste, once again, means you can pick that and you can appreciate that, which must be enjoyed by everyone, not just by a certain time, not just by a certain place, not just as long as a certain fashion reigns, but rather by all human beings, because we are all human beings. We all share a common humanity. And that is what having taste also means to Kant, or what can be developed and furthered through developing your taste. Your humanity or your humaneness, your ability to connect to other people, to not be egocentrical and just concerned with your own private taste, private judgments, but rather to be pluralistic, to be sympathetic, to have a sense, a common sense. I don't mean what is usually called common sense, that sort of like intuitive intellect or whatever, but rather I mean the word common sense here in the literal sense. So, a common sense that you share with your fellow human brothers, um, that allows you to connect to them, even over time, even over different cultures, to find beauty, to appreciate in what they, no matter how different they might have been, what they appreciated because they share the same common humanity as you do. And that is something that we are very much lacking today. And I think in a society such as ours, which is so bereft of that humanity, of that sympathy, of that sense for common humanity, that it cannot even connect with things that have been appreciated only 20 years ago, let alone with things that past centuries have appreciated. Um, I think it is no wonder that we find, if we look at public discourse, at the political debate, there too, there's a complete lack of humaneness, of being able to connect, of sympathy. There's people being in different bubbles and they cannot connect with the people in the other bubble. They cannot appreciate, or maybe while disagreeing with them, maybe even while disagreeing strongly with them, at least understand them. No, they are often very much unable to see their political enemy as human beings at all, to even ask the question, where do they come from? Maybe they are wrong, but still they are not, they are not devils, they are not demons. And also they didn't set out one day to say, oh, how can I be the most wrong and the most evil I could possibly be. No, they are coming, they are human beings, and they are coming from somewhere. Maybe they are coming from a bad place, and maybe that leads to bad results, but still they are coming from somewhere, and we could and should understand that and be somewhat sympathetic to that. And that is something that we can learn, Kant would say, through developing our taste. And in a society without taste, it is no wonder if there is a lack for that humane connection, for that simple human sympathy. But let's go back once more to what taste actually means to Kant. Again, it means being able to pick something that would universally be enjoyed, that would bring pleasure to everyone. And Kant says that even our language, the way we talk about the beautiful, um, sort of reflects that. Because, well, other feelings, we clearly express that they are our feelings. Like I say, I am sad or I am happy. I am not saying that the thing is sad or the thing is happy. Um, with sadness, we sometimes say this, like we will say, this is a sad story or whatever, this is a sad event. When actually, what we mean is, this is a story or an event that causes us sadness. Um, but with other feelings, not so much, right? Like, we are not saying this is a happy event or this is an angry event, but rather this is an event that brings me happiness or that makes me angry for some reason. And when it comes to sense pleasure, um, it is not. We are not so consistent in our speaking. Like we will talk about it as if it was something objective often. Like we will say, this food tastes good, but we can at least say, and that would be more correct. This food tastes good to me, because it might not taste good to someone else. Or I can say, this person is attractive to me, maybe not to someone else. But when it comes to beauty, um, we don't say, like we say, I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel angry. We don't say I feel beautiful. Um, I mean, we say that when we mean I feel like I am beautiful, but that's not what I mean here. I mean, when I look at, let's say, a flower or a sunset, I don't say this is making me feel beautiful, but rather I say this is beautiful. The flower, the sunset is beautiful. So we express it as if the beauty was actually in the object. We express it as if we were making an objective statement. So if I say the flower is red or the flower is a rose, and if I say the flower is beautiful, then the structure, the grammatical structure, right, is the same. As if the beauty was as much objective, as much an actual attribute of that flower as the redness or the roseness is. And of course, there's always this debate between people on whether beauty is something subjective or whether beauty is something objective. Mm, well, I talked in another lecture about Kant's sympathetic method and about how, according to Kant, there's always some partial truth, even in wrong opinions. And in a conflict like that, it's best to find the partial truth of both sides and combine it into a third, into a more true position. So here, the conflict between those who say beauty is subjective and beauty is objective, um, maybe it comes largely from the fact that nowadays we simply misuse the words objective and subjective, because people tend to think that objective means something is the truth, and subjective means it's just my own private opinion that no one else must share. But that is, of course, not what objective and subjective actually mean. What they actually mean is exactly what these words say. Objective is that which is in the object, and subjective is that which is in the subject. So if you ask Kant, he would say beauty, like also sense pleasure, is not objective. Like, I cannot say the beauty of the flower is in the object, and it exists in the object itself, independently of me observing it and judging the flower to be beautiful. So that even if there was no one to appreciate the beauty of the flower, it would still be beautiful. No, it would not be beautiful if there were no human beings to find the flower beautiful. Um, Beauty is subjective in that sense that it is in the subject. It is a feeling a feeling of pleasure, of enjoyment I experience when looking at the flower or at the sunset or whatever. Um, but the fact it's subjective does not mean that it is private and completely individual. That is where people misunderstand the word subjective. Um, what is special about the beautiful, according to Kant, is exactly that it is subjective and still universal. Meaning, beauty is not in the object, it is in you who watches that object, but it is not just in you individual, but in all of you. So, that is the difference between the pleasure of the beautiful and the mere sense pleasure of the pleasant. Um, when I say this food tastes good to me, that is subjective and it is also singular. It only tastes good to me, maybe not to the next guy. But if I say this flower is beautiful, it is subjective but universal because it is in all the subjects. So when it comes to this common expression that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, um, Kant would agree with that expression, but not if it is taken as it often is, as a statement of complete relativism. Because he would say, yes, beauty is not in the object that is being beholden, but rather it is in the eye of the beholder. But as human beings, we all have the same eye. We all share the same general way of viewing things, and therefore we would have to all find the same things beautiful. But here it is about time I clear up a possible misunderstanding that maybe while listening to this whole lecture so far, you had in your head the whole time, and maybe that made you disagree with what I said so far, and maybe that made you discontent with what I said or with what Kant says. So I want to clarify that Kant is not saying when I find something beautiful, when I, with my taste, judge it to be beautiful, that it necessarily is beautiful for everyone. He's just saying that I judge that it should be beautiful for everyone. So, of course, Kant is aware that people disagree on what is beautiful. And maybe you won't find a single thing that every human being would agree is beautiful. I mean, amongst 8 billion people, there will probably always be someone who will say, nah, that's not beautiful. Um, so he is not trying to express, as Kant says, a psychological reality that certain things are deemed beautiful by everyone, but rather, when I make the judgment that something is beautiful, um, then what I'm saying is it should be deemed beautiful by everyone. And if someone doesn't find it beautiful, then I will judge that person to have no taste. That is what it means to find something beautiful. So, the universality of this judgment that something is beautiful and the universal agreement of all people on what is beautiful, that is not a reality. That's not what Kant claims, but it is an idea that we have. And like all ideas, I talked about this in the lecture on reason because reason is our faculty of ideas. Like all ideas, um, this idea is a total representation. So a representation that contains a totality, an absolute, a maximum. And like all ideas, for that very reason, we can never find it in experience. So just like I have the idea of justice, of total, complete, absolute justice, and I will never find in experience a completely just state that fits my idea of justice. I will find states that are more just and others that are more unjust, but I will never find one that is truly and fully just. And just like that, I have this idea of the universal agreement of the taste of all human beings that something is beautiful. um, I will never find an instance where everyone agrees, but still, that is my idea. When I call something beautiful, what I mean by calling it beautiful is everyone should agree with me that this is beautiful, that this brings him pleasure. Everyone should appreciate it. And if someone doesn't, then that person clearly has no taste. And this taste to Kant has a very important social function. I mean, it starts with the fact that the beautiful can be enjoyed by everyone. Kant would say that the pleasant, so the sense pleasure, um, there's always something egoistical about it. Usually, we cannot take pleasure, sense pleasure, in the same thing at the same time. Um, like, let's say, two people, when they are eating food, when they are eating a cake, of course, they can eat together in the sense that they sit at the same table, and in the sense that they both eat pieces of the same cake. But they won't eat the very same piece of that cake, right? What's going into my mouth cannot possibly at the same time go into the other person's mouth. As, at least not without things getting very disgusting. And even then, it's either in my mouth or in the other person's mouth. So that means that in the end, everyone is really enjoying his own piece and taking pleasure from his own piece. And we can only both enjoy a piece of it as long as there is enough for both. Like, sure, if the cake is big enough, then I can have a slice, you can have a slice. But if there's one piece of cake left only, then one person can eat it and enjoy it, and the other person won't have anything then. Because also this sense pleasure, it usually, maybe not in all cases, but usually it uses up the thing that gives us pleasure. With food, we can see that. If I eat something, then it tasted good to me, but now I sort of destroyed it. I sort of took it away from my fellow human beings, and no other person can now ever enjoy the good taste of this food that I just ate. When it comes to the pleasure that the beautiful gives us, that is a more social form of pleasure, because it is a pleasure that comes from mere contemplation. And two people, or even more than two, can contemplate the same thing at the same time. Like, several people can look together at a beautiful painting or at a beautiful flower, and several people can listen together to a beautiful music. Here, it's not just that I have one piece of this cake and the other person has another piece. Like, I listen to one piece of the music and the other person listens to another piece. But no, we can really enjoy the very same thing, not just parts of the same thing, at the same time. And also, usually the beautiful is not used up by it being enjoyed. I mean, it can maybe go away in another way, like a sunset will only be there for some minutes, maybe. But in those minutes, it really doesn't matter if it's seen by one person or by 1,000 people. That won't make the sunset go away faster. So the beautiful is not used up. It is a pleasure, it is an enjoyment that I can share with others. This painting still remains, this music can still be played again once I have enjoyed it. It's not destroyed for other people's enjoyment after I enjoyed it. And also this beauty, it can bring people together, Kant says, like having the same taste, enjoying the same things, can be a fundament of a sort of friendship. Maybe not the deepest friendship there is, but one kind of friendship. Because to Kant, there are three kinds of friendship which correspond with the three natures we have. So, corresponding with our animal nature, there's a sort of comradeship where you help each other, like two hunters hunting together and supporting each other. And based on our spiritual nature, there is what Kant would consider actual true friendship, that is a moral friendship, that is based, Kant would say, mainly on people having similar judgments, mainly on moral and religious and political questions, and a friendship where you can really be completely open and honest with one another and open your hearts to each other, and where you are really like one soul and where you are really there for each other. But between those two, there is an aesthetical friendship, which maybe doesn't run so deep that you would sacrifice everything for that other person, or that you would share your deepest, darkest secrets with that other person. But still, um, a friendship that is based on enjoying that other person's company. Not like in the first type, where that other person is actually useful for you, where you're actually working together to reach the same goals, but just a social friendship where you enjoy each other's company because you have the same sense of humor, or um, you like to play the same games. And taste can further this social friendship. It can bring people together. Like Kant says that it is in the nature of the beautiful that I don't just want to contemplate it. I often want to share it with others. And like if I see a beautiful sunset when looking out of the window, um, I might call my buddy, my roommate who's in the other room, and tell him, "Oh, look out of the window. There's a beautiful sunset right now. You don't want to miss it." And often Kant would say, the beautiful, we don't just want to look at it, we want to talk about it. Like if I went to a play in the theater in Kant's time, or today we could also say if I went to a movie, and I enjoyed it as a work of art, then maybe I want to talk to other people about it. And that can bring people together. Like in Kant's time, they could come together at a dinner party or whatever. And nowadays, you can even go into the internet and come together with total strangers. You can go to some forum and talk to total strangers who like the same movie or like the same music as you do, and you can talk to them, you can connect with them. So in that sense, beauty, or the taste for beautiful things, the taste for art, is important to Kant because it can lift us up from our egoism, and it can make us more pluralistic. It can make us sort of open up for other people. Again, as I already said, it develops our humanity, our sympathy, our common sense that we share with others. Um, Kant would say that someone who only thinks of himself has no taste for the beautiful. Like he often says that miserly people they don't care for the beautiful, right? Like think of someone like Scrooge in The Christmas Carol. I mean, he is way too tight on his money to care about decorating his house in a beautiful way. Why would he do that? He himself doesn't gain anything from it. It's not useful, like it doesn't profit him, it doesn't bring him more money. um, Maybe he would cause enjoyment to others who would see those beautiful decorations, but that's exactly the thing. Such a person lives as an egoist. He doesn't think about bringing enjoyment to others. As soon as I start caring about the beautiful, because the beautiful, once again, is defined by Kant as that which doesn't just fit my own private tastes, but which fits into the taste of everyone and can be enjoyed by everyone. As soon as I do that, um, I sort of, with my senses, with my judgment, with my taste, reach out to other people and think about what would make them happy and not just me. And therefore, it has this important social function. But also, of course, on the other hand, it can only develop in society, Kant says, because again, the taste is the faculty or the ability to pick that which will be enjoyed by everyone. But how could I, since I'm not just born with taste, I have to train it and develop it. How could I do that unless I actually dealt with other people, unless I actually was in society? Kant likes to say that if you were stranded on a lone island, you would probably not care much about the beautiful. Um, you would take pleasure in, um, you would take intellectual pleasure in the useful. Like you would think about what is useful to me, what can help me survive here. And then when that is cleared up, when your survival is secured somewhat, maybe you would also care about the sense pleasure, about the pleasant. So first you would eat anything, even if it's disgusting, as long as it lets you survive. And if on that island there's enough food for you, then maybe you would pick what tastes best, right? You would seek the fruits on the trees that taste bad to you, that taste best to you. Um, but you would not, Kant says, care much about decorating your house. You would care about the house you build, shielding you from the weather, from storms, but you would not care much about decorating the house or decorating your clothes if there was no other human beings to see and to appreciate it. I think that is very important to note. Um, Nowadays, that too is something that is sometimes heavily discussed, right? So when it comes to this decorating yourself, you will have, for example, women saying, "Oh, I don't do my makeup for men; I do it for myself." And then you will have other people, usually men, cynical, maybe misogynist man, who will say, "Oh no, you are clearly just doing your makeup to attract men." Well, both are wrong, and once again, both also are not wrong completely, but both have a partial truth. So here too, um, we should apply Kant's sympathetic method and see where they are coming from and why what they claim appears correct to them. And I would say a woman who talks like that is right with the first part of what she is saying. Like, yes, women are not using makeup simply to appeal to men and to attract men. To believe that would be very naive, and if you are a man, it would also be very arrogant on top of that. No, the woman probably is not constantly thinking about how she can appeal to you. Like, of course, I'm also not saying that no woman does that. Of course, there are women who try to wear certain makeup to attract certain men, no doubt about that. Um, but in general, when a woman goes out every day wearing some makeup, or also when she dresses up like for a concert or whatever, you mustn't assume that her main goal that she consciously has is attracting men. So in that sense, she's right. But I think the second part of her statement, I am just doing it for myself, is wrong. And that is maybe where the other side, who doesn't believe her statement, is right, because they sense that this I do it for myself, that this is too superficial. Because no, of course not. I don't believe a single woman who tells me she does her makeup for herself. I believe you that you are not doing it to attract men, for sure. But I don't believe that stranded on a lone island, if for some reason you also were stranded with a big supply of makeup, you would still do your daily makeup. You would still care about what you look like. I mean, there are some women for whom it goes so far that they don't dare to leave their house without makeup at all. I don't think you would still do that on a lone island. I don't think you would spend an hour every morning doing your makeup in your hut that you built on that lonely island before you go out to hunt and fish to survive. So clearly, you are not just doing it for yourself. You are doing it within society. You are doing it in respects to other people. When people care about any sort of beauty at all, even in a more primitive way. And surely this is an example of a more primitive way. I'm not taking this as an example of good taste. Usually it's an example of bad taste. But even bad taste has this wish to be universal, to appeal to anyone. And again, I don't mean appeal in a sexual sense. I'm not implying that that is what is unconsciously at play here. But still, when people sort of decorate themselves with makeup or with jewelry or with their dress or whatever, um, they are not just doing it for themselves as private individuals disconnected from everyone else, but they are doing it in a social context. And I think Kant is quite right to note that taste is very much a social thing. He also, by the way, says that for that reason, in his time in the 18th century, the French people have the best taste when it comes to social interactions, to manners, but also very much when it comes to literature, to literary style. They have the best taste, Kant says, because they are the most social people. They have this culture of social gatherings and salons in the 18th century, and these constant interactions with each other. They are like a school on what appeals to not just me privately, but also to the people around me. It is, however, important to make a distinction between all of that and fashion. Because fashion, Kant says, is actually not about true taste, but rather fashion ruins actual taste. Because taste, that is the aesthetical power of judgment, is after all a form of the reflecting power of judgment. That means that it works without a rule. You are not just given a rule that you're now applying, but rather you are freely contemplating something and freely reflecting about it and sort of trying to find a rule. You are trying to find what will be liked by everyone. And as soon as you slavishly follow a certain fashion, um, you stop doing that. You are now given a rule on what is or isn't fashionable, and so therefore you are not really judging by your reflective power of judgment anymore, but by your determining power of judgment. You are simply applying that rule, maybe quite mindlessly. And so you're probably becoming pedantic even. I talked in the lecture on the power of judgment about how to Kant it is exactly lack of that power of judgment which causes people to be pedantic, to mindlessly follow rules because they can't judge whether the rule should apply here or not. And he says there are such pedantics of fashion. So people who will not allow the slightest deviation from the current fashion trend. And now they are not judging freely on whether something is beautiful and tasteful and could be enjoyed by all people um, beyond my time and age and its fashion trends. But rather, they are just judging whether something fits with the rules of their fashion or not. And when I say fashion, you mustn't just think about fashion when it comes to clothes or whatever. So, of course, it applies to that. Um, but rather there are fashions and trends in all matters of taste and art, right? Like there are also fashions when it comes to movies or to video games or to music or whatever. Like I've totally talked to people who were unable to appreciate certain beautiful movies simply because they weren't the typical current blockbuster movies. So simply because they didn't fit whatever rules that person had in his head of what a movie should be like. That person was so enslaved by that rules, he couldn't judge is that is that a beautiful movie or not, but he could only check does it fit these rules that I have or doesn't it fit them? And that makes you unable of making an actual judgment of taste. And indeed, we can see that fashions usually only appear to those people who are, um, well, let's say the brainwashed victims of those fashions. Um, we can see that even while that fashion is in place, if we are aufklärt enough to, well, not be a victim of that fashion. Um, but even if we are less aufklärt, we can maybe see it once that fashion is over and once we look back. Often we find that many fashion trends were not beautiful at all, that they were quite ugly or tasteless or even outright ridiculous um, once they are over. I mean, think of Kant's own age. Think of the Baroque time of the 18th century. Think of how everyone was so powdered in the face and everyone was walking around with these white wigs. Um, it's ridiculous. And nowadays we can clearly see how ridiculous it was. But the same is true for more recent fashion trends. Like I still remember that's it's not very long ago. Mm, when I was in school, there was this trend for the boys to absolutely drench their hair in gel and to form it into a comb of sorts, which I found ridiculous even back then, but apparently they didn't. But nowadays, this trend has completely died out. Like, I haven't seen that in years. And if a boy nowadays were to do that to his hair, maybe his peers too would find it ridiculous. And that's something you can say about all the fashions, right? Like, still, a man wearing a tie is considered fashionable or good and serious looking. But I wonder how will future centuries think about the facts that very men who wanted to be very serious, like world leaders and CEOs and stuff, that they all had completely useless and functionless strips of cloth dangling from their neck. If you think about it, it's really a very ridiculous piece of clothing. And that is the thing with fashion. It makes us blind for actual taste, so for that which could appeal to anyone, even if they weren't raised or influenced by a certain fashion trend, but rather it makes us only follow that particular trend. And I think we can see that nowadays too. Again, if we are aufklärt enough, to abstract from a fashion even while it rains, that a lot of things that are supposed to be fashionable are very tasteless, and if anything, are becoming more and more tasteless. What lots of people might consider the height of fashion just doesn't look beautiful. And I think future ages, not so far in the future, will probably realize that. Now I realize that this whole philosophy is very much untimely because nowadays we live in an age of relativism. It is quite natural, quite necessary even be in that age of relativism nowadays because we live in an age of Ausklärung, that is, of half of pseudo Aufklärung that pretends and lies to itself about that to be the whole Aufklärung. What we have done since the age of Aufklärung is we have done the negative Aufklärung, freeing ourselves from certain arbitrary authorities. But we have not taken the second step, that is the step to positive Aufklärung. That is submitting once again to an authority, but this time not to an arbitrary authority outside of us, but rather to the necessary authority of our own reason. And since we are in this middle place, having gotten rid of the old arbitrary authority, but not having submitted to the authority of reason yet, there is no authority at all. And that means complete arbitrariness and complete relativism. And we can see this relativism even in matters that are objective, like when it comes to morality, when it comes to truth. There are many, many people who will say there is no such thing as a moral law, or who will even say there is no truth, everyone has their own truth. But when it comes to taste, this relativism is therefore to be expected even more in an age such as ours, because taste is subjective. It is universal, but still, or it at least carries with it the idea of universality, but still it is subjective. So if we are relativists even in objective matters, then it is to be expected that we are going to be relativists in subjective matters. And so nowadays, you will find lots of people saying, oh, everyone has their own taste. There is no right and wrong when it comes to taste. Everyone just has their own. But Kant calls this a statement of ignorance, of rawness or roughness, and a statement that is asocial or antisocial. Because to say everyone has their own taste is really the same as to say there is no taste. I mean, we don't need a word for it then. It would mean that it is not a thing. But I think if you reflect about it, you will find that is not how we actually use the word taste. And that is Kant's great strength. He's not just coming up with random opinions. Like, what I explain here in this lecture and in others, it's not just Kant's opinion that maybe is interesting or maybe not, but it is his random opinion. No. As I already explained in the lecture on what is metaphysics to Kant, philosophy, according to him, mainly has the task of not finding new knowledge, like maybe natural science does, um, but rather explaining what we already unconsciously, vaguely know to us, bringing more clarity into our knowledge. So it is not a task of philosophy to come up with a completely new definition of taste that no one ever meant when talking about taste, but that this particular philosopher wants to give to that word. No, it is the task of philosophy to show to us what we have always unconsciously meant when talking about taste. And I think if you reflect, you will find that when it comes to sense pleasure, then sure, you are perfectly fine with saying everyone has his own private taste. Um, I don't, when I say that some food tastes good to me, I don't expect that it must taste good to everyone else. Or when I say that a certain person is attractive to me, I don't expect that that person must be attractive to everyone else. Because I understand that when it comes to the sense pleasure, everyone has a different sensuality. Everyone has a different body craving different things. And also, everyone has a different psyche, and everyone maybe was raised and influenced in different ways. But when it comes to the beautiful, it's not the same. It's one thing to say, oh, this tastes good for me, or this person is attractive to me, or this bed is comfortable to me, and to accept that to someone else it isn't. But when I say this is beautiful to me, this flower, this sunset, this piece of art, and now I find that someone else disagrees with me, I won't just say, oh, well, that person is different, so he likes different things, but rather I will say, or at least I will have the vague feeling that this person has no taste if he disagrees with me. Um, or maybe I will even go further. If it is something that I consider very beautiful, something that really touches me and that deeply moves me, and then another person is completely cold towards it and doesn't care at all, uh, there may be instances where I will be shocked by that even. Um, by how little it touches him, and where I will maybe express something like, that person is completely soulless. If this doesn't touch you, you have no soul. And this, once again, comes because with the judgment that something is beautiful, there is connected at least the idea of its universal appeal. At least the idea that it should appeal to everyone. Now, I will make the disclaimer that even when it comes to sense pleasure, some people act like everyone should like the same things. So when it comes to food, you will also have people, when you say I don't like this or that food, who will be shocked and who will say, "What? Have you no taste? This food tastes great. You don't know what you are talking about. You don't know what you are missing out on." Or when it comes to attractiveness, sometimes when you say, oh, I don't find that woman attractive, someone will say, what, are you nuts? Of course she's super hot. Are you gay or what? Or um, they will maybe say that actually you do find her attractive, and you just don't admit it. Like maybe they will say something like, you're just saying that because you can't have her or whatever. So they won't believe that you really mean it. But that is just very unaufklärt people. That is people who are stuck in their sensuality and who are stuck, egocentrically stuck in their own little selves. Because that is what the unaufklärtness is always like. they can't abstract from themselves. And for unaufclared people, whenever they are confronted with something different, like with someone having a different taste, taking pleasure in different things, but also with someone maybe having different customs, having a different culture, having a different skin color, having a different belief. Whenever they are confronted with something different, their first reaction is to say that this other thing is somehow wrong or is somehow lesser than what they know and what they do. And this is somewhat natural. Like you can observe that in little children. They will squabble about the smallest differences. At first, they only know one thing from themselves, from their family, and when they're confronted with something different, they will often first reject it. Like I remember in my time in daycare, because I too wasn't just born aufklärt, I had a discussion with some other kid about the sound that the cars of the firefighters, the sirens, are making. Like in German, we or the children, they often say, that's what the other kid said, that they make tatütata, but I had learned it. My dad had always said it as la lu la la, and I remember we had a discussion about that, me and that other boy, and we very strongly disagreed with one another. We basically said, "What are you talking about? Are you stupid? The sirens don't make la lu la la; they make ta tu ta ta. No, you are stupid. They make la lu la la." And of course, looking back, that's a completely ridiculous discussion. I mean, they don't make either of those sounds. Both are just an attempt to express the sound the siren actually does make. Um, but that's the thing. The first reaction, the first impulse, so to say, when you realize that something is different, might be to say, no, the way I have always done it is the correct way, so everything different must be wrong. Um, it is a mark of Aufklärung to be a relativist in these things, because that's also what I want to make clear. When I attack relativism, um, I don't want to attack it completely, because here too Kant's sympathetic method holds true. There is no such thing as complete error. Even in the wrong opinions, there's a partial truth. That is true for relativism too. I'm not completely rejecting relativism. Relativism is right in certain instances. Actually, the aufklärt person will be a relativist in a lot of matters. Um, in all surface matters, in all matters where reason doesn't say it's one way or another. Uh, and that would include all matters of sense taste, like does this food taste good or bad? Is that person attractive or not attractive? An aufklärt person will be a relativist here, and it will always be a sign of unaufklärtness to not be a relativist here. Where relativism is wrong is in the way the ausklärt people use it, because they claim to be absolute relativists. And I mean, you can hear from the very name that it is a quite ridiculous position to take. They are relativists not just in matters where reason is silent, but rather in matters like truth or morality, where reason has a lot to say. And more than that, they are also liars about it, because they only claim to be relativists. But in fact, if you don't just listen to their words, but look at what they're actually doing and how they are behaving, how they are judging other people, you will find that they are not relativistic at all. There is good and evil for them, and usually evil to them is anyone and anything who is not a complete relativist. So if they are confronted with someone who says that there is good and evil, it's not just all relative, and we do have a moral duty. And that is what always happens. That has happened to me already. You can observe that happening to someone like Greta Thunberg. It has happened in the past to someone like Fichte. Um, they will always respond saying, "Oh, that's arrogant of you," or "You are being despotic and totalitarian," or whatever. So, in other words, they will say, "You believing in moral duty and you believing in good and evil is evil," which is not actually a relativistic stance. So they are not even being consistent, they are being liars and lying to themselves. And that's what I'm attacking them for. But on a surface level, sure, be a relativist if you want to be aufklärt. But back once more to that common expression that everyone has his own taste. It's not enough to reject or even to refute it. I talked in another lecture about Kant's critical method, which demands that if we disagree with an opinion, we don't just show how it is wrong, but how, despite being wrong, it seems to be right to those who hold it. We need to explain the source of the illusion, Kant says, and thereby also block that source, thereby make that illusion go away. So, how come that it is so common for people to think the taste were something completely individual? Well, that is most likely the case because it is subjective, despite its universality, and because Kant says it is not based on concepts. Because usually, when it comes to universality, universality comes from concepts. I talked about them in the lecture on what is the intellect. The intellect's our faculty of concepts, and a concept is a general rule, a rule of connecting certain attributes. Like, for example, in the concept of a mammal, I think certain things like giving milk to its young, always having the same body temperature, regulating its own body temperature. So there are several attributes I may find in sensuality, which through a rule get connected into one concept. And usually, that is exactly the reason why, when people disagree, they can have a discussion on that, and why it is possible to convince someone based on concepts to change their opinion. Like if someone told me cats are reptiles, well, the concept of reptile, that too is a rule. That too contains certain attributes. And now I could point him at sensuality, I could show him cats, and I could show him that they don't fit this rule. I could show him that they rather fit the rule that is expressed in the concept mammal. I could show him they give milk to their young, they regulate their own body temperature, and so on. And so I could convince him to change his opinion that cats are reptiles to that cats are mammals. But when it comes to the beautiful, it is clearly not based on concepts. It is not that my intellect has a general rule of what is beautiful. If that were the case, then it would not be a matter for the reflecting power of judgment. And again, the taste is just the aesthetical power of judgment, which is a version of the reflecting power of judgment. No, then the beautiful would be the task for the determining power of judgment, which would just have to apply the intellect's rule, just like it applies the concepts of mammal or of reptile to certain animals, because it finds that they do have the attributes which, by that rule, are connected into one concept. That's not the case when it comes to beauty, right? And hence, I cannot, through concepts, be convinced to change my judgment about something being or not being beautiful. Kant says, if I watch a play, a theater play, and I don't like it, then someone can explain to me and prove to me how that play perfectly fits all the rules that all the theories of theater have talked about from the days of Aristotle to Lessing. Kant says, still, I I might even agree with that person that yes, this play, if I think about it, it really was written according to all of those rules from Aristotle to Lessing. But Kant says, still, that would not convince me that it was a good play. That would not make me suddenly like the play that previously I disliked. Rather, I would rather come to the conclusion that in that case the rules must be wrong. And all the theoreticians of theater from Aristotle all the way down to Lessing must have been wrong if apparently it is possible to write a play which breaks none of those rules, which fulfills all the requirements these theoreticians talked about, and still apparently is a bad play. So you cannot convince me to find something beautiful um, by logical arguments, by using concepts. And also, we don't need concepts to find something beautiful. I talked about this already in the previous lecture. I said that is the very reason why the objective dogmatic rationalism of the Leibniz-Wolffian school of someone like Baumgarten um, is clearly wrong when it comes to the beautiful. Um, that rationalism which had claimed that the beautiful is the perfect, because whether something is perfect or not, that can be judged based on the concept of what that thing is supposed to be. If I know that the blossom of a flower is supposed to be its reproductive organ, then I can judge whether it's perfect or not. I can say, oh, the color, the smell it has, that actually attracts insects, so that is perfect. Or I can say, no, it is colored in a way and it smells in a way that actually repels the insects, which could pollinate that flower. So clearly, it is very imperfect. It's not doing the job it should be doing. Um, that judgment would require me to have a concept of what the flower or the blossom of the flower is about. But their judgment is completely disconnected from me judging whether it looks beautiful to me or not. And clearly, to find something beautiful, I don't need to know what it is or what it is supposed to mean. Um, when it comes to art, when it comes to the art of words, like poetry, like a song, um, I can even find some artworks beautiful without knowing what they mean. Like there are certain songs in foreign language that I don't understand a word of. I don't know what they are singing. But the mere sound, the mere form of that sound, still is beautiful to me. And that is still possible, even if maybe the content is not so beautiful. Like, for example, it's often talked about how beautiful the Quran is, right? And that is even an argument for its divinity for Muslims. And in the Quran itself, it is an argument for its divinity. It is said that a human could not have produced something so beautiful. And indeed, you can hardly deny, if you hear certain recitations, if you hear the Quran being sung, how beautiful it can sound. But it always sounds beautiful, no matter which line is being recited. So it could be the line about God loving those who act beautifully, and about repaying a bad action with a better action, so that a foe turns into a friend. But it could also be a passage talking about the fires of hell and about people being tortured in hell, and still that passage sounds equally beautiful, even though the content clearly isn't. And Kant says that it's even possible, like, even if you do understand the words, um, it is even possible for the words to be wrong if you take them in the literal meaning. So it is possible for a work of poetry to be wrong in the sense of expressing something which is not literally truthful. So, in the sense of concepts, of rules, it is actually incorrect, but that doesn't take from its beauty. Like, for example, um, one very famous German poem by the romantic poet Eichendorff, Mondnacht, so Moon Night. It starts with: Es war, als hätte der Himmel die Erde still geküsst, dass sie im Blütenschimmer von ihm nun träumen müsst. Um, which can be translated as a literal translation. Um, it was as if the sky had quietly kissed the earth, so that in the shimmer of blossoms, she now had to dream of him. Again, that's a literal translation. Of course, it sounds better in German, where it rhymes, where it has a certain metric, than now my literal English translation. But the literal translation shows you very clearly that if you were to take this literally, it's just nonsense, right? The sky can't kiss the earth and the earth can't dream. But that doesn't make the poem any less beautiful. Because Kant says there is a difference between logical truth and aesthetical truth. He does say that a work of art still needs to be true in the aesthetical sense. It cannot just be completely untrue. But logical truth would be what we usually mean by truth. That means factual truth, describing how the world really is. On the other hand, aesthetical truth to Kant means describing how the world seems, describing the illusion, describing how the world seems to be to me. So, logical truth is based on what the intellect should think about the world, while aesthetical truth expresses what my sensuality, how my sensuality is affected by the world. So it expresses my subjectivity, not the objective facts. So Kant would say that a poet is allowed to say that in the evening the sun is sinking into the ocean. Now, in the logical sense, this is not true. Thankfully not, because if it were true, the ocean would be vaporized by the heat of the sun. That would not be a good thing for us. So a natural scientist is not allowed to express himself like that, because logically it's untrue. But Kant says it has aesthetic truth, because that is the illusion, that is what seems to happen. That is how it looks like to my sensuality. It looks as if the sun was sinking into the ocean. Again, the poet still needs to be truthful, Kant says. Truthful in the aesthetic, not in the logical sense, but still truthful in that sense. So he's allowed to say the sun is sinking into the ocean in the evening. He is not saying the sun is making loops on the sky and then flying away into the vast space. Because that would not just be logically untrue, it would also be aesthetically untrue. Like that's not what we are seeing, right? And the poet needs to still hold to aesthetic truths and still describe what we are seeing. But my point here is that clearly beauty is not based on concepts and on correct concepts, because something can be beautiful even if I don't know what it is, or even if what it is, when I take it literally, wrong. Actually, Kant goes so far in his assessment that he would rather say there is a sort of antagonism between cognition and pleasure and the beautiful, between science and beauty, because he would say that understanding something, understanding what it is, that is sort of examining it, dissecting it, taking it apart, looking at its insides, so to say, that rather takes away the magic. That rather takes away the beauty from that thing. And that is because to appreciate beauty, I need to merely contemplate something. And it's not enough to just quickly glance at it, but rather I need to keep dealing with it. I need to keep contemplating it. And that dealing with it is a play. It's playful, Kant says. Um, my faculties of cognition are sort of playing with that thing's form in contemplating it. But when I understand it, I sort of take it into my intellect. I sort of submit that thing to myself. And then once I have understood it, I'm sort of done with it, right? I slap a label on it. I say, this is what it is. This is the rule it falls under. And now I'm done. I can put it into some shelf and shut it. And now I'm done with it. That takes away the magic. That is not the way to appreciate beauty. So not only is beauty not based on concepts, trying to make clear concepts of things, trying to understand things, actually takes me away from appreciating their beauty. I can appreciate their beauty best when I don't think, when I don't want to understand too much, but when I just look, when I just contemplate. So that is what is so special about beauty, that the beautiful is that which doesn't just appeal to me privately, but which appeals to everyone, or at least in judging it to be beautiful, I judge that it should appeal to everyone, and that he to whom it doesn't appeal clearly has no taste. But this universality, which is like all universality, a priori, I make an a priori judgment that that which I a posteriori in experience found to be pleasurable, is beautiful to everyone. That a priori judgment, with its universality, is, unlike all other kinds of judgments, is not based on concepts. So the beautiful is something which we deem to be universally beautiful, to be enjoyed by everyone, or able to be enjoyed by everyone at least. But we are not basing that universal judgment on a concept. That's the special thing about beauty. And that is what is taste. Taste, once again, is that ability of our aesthetical power of judgment to judge that something will appeal to others too, without basing that judgment on a concept, on an understanding of what that thing is, on a clear rule which I could express and explain. Like, I could not say why it must appeal to everyone, I could not say, it has these and that attributes, so clearly it must be liked by every person. I can just say it is beautiful, which is just synonymous with saying, like, that's not an explanation, that is just expressing that it must appeal to everyone. And with that, I want to end this lecture. And of course, this leaves the question: how? How is this possible? How can the beautiful be something which we say should appeal to everyone, without being based on a concept? What exactly is happening when we find something beautiful? That is exactly what I want to get into in the next lecture. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Christos Pei, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, as well as to all others who support me and my Aufklären course.